Admit. Oh, geez, this looks terrible. Hi, Jen. Let's go ahead. Hey, Jen.
Hi,
How are you?
how are you?
Good. It might just be us again today.
Well, I know Joanne will come next Tuesday and she is very excited about seeing the recording of this. So she's
Oh,
been going right along with us.
awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me share my screen and pull up this document. Okay, so I actually got to pull up from last week. We're starting with we had just a couple pages left of week 3. I have no idea where that document is. Oh well. We both have a copy. Okay, so let me bring this back up to full screen. The heck is going on? Okay, so I guess before we do this, I'm going to read the big book format, the workshop format. So my name is Jessica and I'm an alcoholic. Welcome to the Big Book Workshop. We as leaders do not consider ourselves the gurus of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, nor do we consider ourselves to be experts in anything at all. For those who care to join me, please take a moment of silence to remind us of why we are still here and for the alcoholic who is still suffering. And please join me in the workshop prayer. If you have your book with you, it's actually on page 5, what we read at the beginning. I need to remember to include this on my documents I share on the screen. It says, God, let me set aside everything I know about you, AA, myself, and my disease for an open mind and a new experience. Let me be honest and thorough. Amen. For the first couple of weeks, we'll go around the room and introduce ourselves in order to get to know one another. My name is Jessica and I'm an alcoholic.
I'm Jen and I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Jen. The purpose of this workshop is to experience the recovery process as outlined in the Big Book of AA, either for the first time or again, so that we may better carry out and understand our primary purpose, which is to stay sober and carry the message to the still suffering alcoholic. We are here to talk about recovery only and go through the 12-step process as outlined in the Big Book. This is not an emotional or intellectual exercise. It is a spiritual exercise, so we can all recover and experience the recovery process as we read it together. It is recommended that anything you hear here cannot be reconciled in the Big Book, 12 and 12, or AA-approved literature simply be ignored. This is a non-crosstalk workshop. Questions should be saved for the end of the meeting or after the meeting. Chances are very good that questions will be answered at a later time during the workshop. So, oh, I did have the PDF right here on my screen. I thought that was a video. Sweet. So we left on page 44 last week. So I'm just going to keep scrolling. This was like a very long week that we could not fit into one session. So since this week is pretty short, we will definitely have time to finish this up here. And there it is. So this is where we left off. We were in Bill's story. So I guess I will start reading, and then do you want to take turns like we did last time, maybe?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. So Joe and Charlie, now that Now, I'm damn glad that that didn't happen in my kitchen. I have no idea what I would have done, but here's what Bill did. He said, I was aghast, so was it last summer, an alcoholic crackpot. Now I suspected a little cracked about religion. I had that starry-eyed look. Yes, that old boy was on fire, all right. But bless his heart, let him rant. Besides, my gym would last longer than his preaching. But he did no ranting. In a matter of fact, he told me how two men had appeared in court, persuading the judge to suspend his commitment. They had told a simple religious idea and practical program of action. That was 2 months ago, and the result was self-evident. It worked. A simple religious idea equals step 2. A practical program of action equals steps 3 through 12. Joe and Charlie. So now we see Bill knows all 3 things. He has the problem from Dr. Silkworth. He's got the solution referred to here as a simple religious idea from Ebby. And he got the practical program of action from Ebby. So he knows all 3 things. But Bill, like so many of us, did not like the simple religious idea. Now Bill's thoughts and his idea about God, about religion, etc., were enough that it made him resent Ebby that he had brought it to him. He said on the big book, page 9, paragraph 7, he had come to pass his experience along to me if I cared to have it. I was shocked, but interested. Certainly I was interested. I had to be, for I was hopeless. He talked for hours. Childhood memories rose before me. I could almost hear the sound of the preacher's voice as I sat on still Sundays, way over there on the hillside, where that pro-offered temperance pledge I never signed, my grandfather's good-natured contempt of some church fold and their doings. In his instance, that the spheres really had their music, but his denial of the preacher's right to tell him how he must listen. Joe and Charlie. Now, Bill's grandfather, Grandpa Griffith, raised him 12 years on, and Grandpa Griffith believed that in some power greater than human power that he would let anyone tell him how he had to believe in. His grandpa had a great problem with the world's religions. He passed that along to Bill. In the big book, it says, his fearlessness as he spoke of these things just before he died, these recollections welled up from the past. They made me swallow hard. That wartime day in old Winchester Cathedral came back again. Bill's having a problem now with this religious idea that Ebby's talking about. We've seen him take step 1. In the next couple of pages, we're going to see him take step 2. Let's see how he came to be able to accept this religious idea. Now, Bill's already taken step 1, so now he's between steps 1 and 2, but he hasn't taken step 2 yet. He begins to ponder these things. He says in the big book, I had always believed in a power greater than myself. I had often pondered these things. I was not an atheist. Few people really are, for that means blind faith in the strange proposition that this universe originated in a cipher and aimlessly rushes nowhere. My intellectual heroes, the chemists, the astronomers, even the evolutionists, suggested vast laws and forces at work. Despite contrary indications, I had little doubt that might purpose and rhythm underlie all. How could there be so much of precise and immutable law and no intelligence? I seemed to have to believe in a spirit of the universe who knew neither time nor limitation, but that was as far as I had gone. Do you want to read? Oh, I should probably screen for the other people that plan to watch this. Right here.
Shall I begin?
Oh, yeah.
Joe and Charlie. Now here's where I really begin to identify with Bill Wilson. From the big book. With ministers and the world's religions, I parted right there. When they talked of a God personal to me, who was love, superhuman strength and direction, I became irritated, and my mind snapped shut against such a theory. To Christ I conceded the certainty of a great man, not too closely followed by those who claimed him. His moral teaching most excellent. For myself, I had adopted those parts which seemed convenient and not too difficult. The rest I disregarded. Joe and Charlie. Anybody in here identify with Bill Wilson? You betcha. We can see that Bill's having a terrible time with his religious idea. Now let's go down to the middle of the paragraph from the big book. But my friend sat before me, and he made the point blank declaration that God had done for him what he could not do for himself. His human will had failed. Doctors had pronounced him incurable. Society was about to lock him up. Like myself, he had admitted complete defeat. Then he had, in effect, been raised from the dead, suddenly taken from the scrap heap to a level of life better than the best he had ever known. Had this power originated in him? Obviously, it had not. There had been no more power in him than there was in me at that minute, and this was none at all. Joe and Charlie, this is why the identification process is so important. Bill knew about Ebby. He knew how Ebby drank, and he knew that if Ebby had been sober 2 months, some power greater than Ebby had to be working in Ebby's life. Whether Bill likes it or not is absolutely beside the point. Ebby is living proof of it. That's what you and I offer to the newcomer. When we sit there talking to the newcomer, we're living proof that some power greater than human power is working in our lives. Whether the newcomer likes it or not is beside the point. We are the proof of it. Ebby was the proof for Bill. Now, I'd like to have been there that day, sitting in a corner watching them. Bill's about 2/3 drunk. Ebby has come out of the Oxford groups, who are a group of people practicing first century Christianity to the best of their ability. The terms they used were highly religious in nature. Ebby is on fire and he's talking about God, and Bill doesn't like it at all. They're sitting there arguing with each other about who God is and what he is. Bill said, "Don't give me that religious crap. Oh, yeah, I believe in the great mind, the spirit of nature, but don't give me that other kind of stuff." Ebby's trying to put it on old Bill. They're arguing back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Let's go over to page 12, first paragraph. In the big book, he says, "Despite the living example of my friend, there remained in me the vestiges of my old prejudice. The word God still aroused a certain antipathy. When the thought was expressed that there might be a God personal to me, this feeling was intensified. I didn't like the idea. I could go for such conceptions as creative intelligence, universal mind, or spirit of nature, but I resisted the thought of a czar of the heavens. However loving his sway might be, I have since talked with scores of men who felt the same way." Joe and Charlie. In other words, Bill was saying there's got to be a harder way to do this. What you're saying is too simple. Now I guess Ebby finally got tired of this deal. Let's look at the next statement very carefully. If you notice, it's in squiggly writing. And I pass.
Okay, thank you. The big book says, my friend suggested that what then seemed a novel idea. He said, why don't you choose your own conception of God? Joe and Charlie. In other words, he said, Bill, what are we arguing about? What difference does it make what we call him? Why don't you choose your own conception of God? We're no longer dealing with religion now. We're now dealing with spirituality. You see, religion says that this is the one way you have to believe. Spirituality says it doesn't make a difference how you believe. The only question is, are you willing to believe? So we're through with religion. Now we're talking about spirituality. And here's the effect it had on Bill. In the big book, it says, that statement hit me hard. It melted the icy, intellectual mountain in whose shadow I had lived and shivered many years. I stood in the sunlight at last. Joe and Charlie. It took all arguments away from him. He couldn't argue with that statement. Big book. It was only a matter of being willing to believe in a power greater than myself. Nothing more was required to make my beginning. I saw that growth could start from that point. Upon a foundation of complete willingness, I might build what I saw in my friend. Would I have it? Of course I would. Joe and Charlie. Surely this is when Bill took step 2. There was no step 2 written in those days, but here's where he came to believe in a power greater than himself. Based on Ebby's simple little statement, why don't you choose your own conception of God? That statement has opened the door for countless millions of we alcoholics who have trouble with religion. And I think the reason it really works is we're allowed to have our own conception of God. You know, I look at back in my lifetime, I realize I've never had a problem with my own conception of anything. Let me believe that the way I want to, and I'm ready to go. Bill is now taking a step 2. Isn't that something? Bill was taking a step 2. When he made that statement, I saw the growth that I could start from that point. Upon a foundation of complete willingness, I might build what I saw in my friend. Would I have it? Of course I would. kind of wanted to comment on that part too. That's such an alcoholic thing. Like, I'd be willing to believe if it's my God, versus what you tell me and what you can and can't do. Something I found helpful when we were going through the steps was looking, like, of course, I want to think my way through these things at this point in my recovery before I, fully understand what the steps are about and all of that. So I look up the definition to every word in the big book. I'm like, what's spirituality? What's religion? And I have it printed out. Which I won't grab it because it's not AA approved literature, but it's just in the dictionary. It's like spirituality is our quest for understanding a meaning of life, and religion has set principles and got, like, there's certain things that the religious groups believe they do and do not. So when I was like looking up spirituality, like understanding the quest of the meaning of life, like willing, to believe that I could be restored to sanity, because I felt like I was at one point and then I was not, and it was just something with looking up that definition of spirituality, kind of a similar experience to Bill. I don't know, it helped me. I don't know if that helps anybody else, but
Absolutely.
where did I leave off? Okay, so I was here. That statement has opened the door for countless alcoholics. I read this, right? Yeah. So this is Bill's first reference to a wonderfully affected spiritual structure. He's going to start painting a picture in our minds using words. Eventually, he'll tell us the structure is and show us where we'll pass through it to freedom. His first reference to it is, upon a foundation of complete willingness, I must build what I saw in my friend. The foundation of this structure is willingness. That came from step 1. Then, when we could see what we were doing would no longer work, we became willing to change. Eventually, we are going to see where believing, step 2, is the cornerstone of that structure. And eventually, he'll tell us exactly what that is. It's a beautiful way to teach, painting pictures in our mind using words. If we are willing and if we believe, then we have already started the road to recovery. Bill has now taken steps 1 and 2. Immediately, Ebby starts taking him to the Oxford group meetings. But remember, Bill is still drinking. He triggered the allergy on November 11th, and he cannot stop. I'll pass.
Okay. Thanks, Jessica. Joe and Charlie. On about December 10th, 1934, probably, Bill was put back in the hospital for the third time for withdrawal from alcohol by Dr. Silkworth. Ebby comes to visit with him. They begin to apply the Little Oxford Group's program of action, and Bill had his spiritual experience. Let's look on page 13. Let's see if we can't see the last 10 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. He's taken steps 1 and 2. Let's see if he can't see the last 10. He says, big book, at the hospital, I was separated from alcohol for the last time. Treatment seemed wise, for I showed signs of delirium tremens. There I humbly offered myself to God, as I then understood him, to do with me as he would. I placed myself unreservedly under his care and direction. I admitted for the first time that of myself I was nothing, that without him I was lost. Joe and Charlie. The first tenet that the Oxford group had was surrender. Now, Bill, later on, when he wrote the steps, he realized that no alcoholic would like the word surrender. So he changed their first step into our AA's third step, where we made a decision to turn our will and our life over to the care of God as we understood him. We see him there taking the first Oxford group tenet, which turned out to be our step 3. Now he's taken steps 1, 2, and 3. He says in the big book, I ruthlessly faced my sins. Joe and Charlie. I ruthlessly faced my sins. Their second tenet was examine your sins. And Bill knew that no good alcoholic's going to do that. So he changed that into made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. He's taking step 4 there. Back to the big book. And became willing to have my newfound friend take them away, root and branch. I have not had a drink since. Joe and Charlie. Became willing to have my newfound friend take them away, root and branch. You'll notice friend is capitalized. This is one of the words Bill uses for God. And that little statement, became willing to have my newfound friend take them away, root and branch, later became step 6 and 7. We became willing to have God remove these things and humbly asked him to do so. There, we're dealing with 6 and 7, the big book. My schoolmate visited me, and I fully acquainted him with my problems and deficiencies. Joe and Charlie. He's taking what we know today as step 5. There in the town's hospital with Ebby. Big book. We made a list of people I had hurt or toward whom I felt resentment. I expressed my entire willingness to approach these individuals, admitting my wrong. Never was I to be critical of them. I was to write all such matters to the utmost of my ability. Pass.
I wanted to comment on that too. Made a searching and furious moral inventory of ourselves. That was another word I had to underline and look up. So I was like, what's moral? You know, it just means truth, a truthful inventory. And I love the history of AA, and I've read so much on certain things like this. And the reason he used that word moral, he'll use the word they'll use different words throughout the book that mean the same thing so other people can understand it. Because when we come in here, and we think we can drink or control it or whatever, where any alcoholic that thinks he can drink normally is believing a lie, and where he uses the word insanity. I don't know if he uses the word delusional, but he uses multiple different words throughout the book. They all mean lie, delusion, insanity. It's just not reality. It's not what's actually going on. So he changed the word, like they were saying there, to not sin, but moral. So, we're going from a lie to looking at what the truth was. And I thought that was kind of cool. So on to the next page here. Joe and Charlie. They had an Oxford group tenant called restitution, and Bill knew that no self-respecting alcoholic is going to do restitution, even if it's court ordered. So he took that and made 2 steps out of it, steps 8 and 9, where he made the list and became willing, and then made amends with 8 and 9 in the big book. I was to test my thinking by the new God consciousness within. Common sense would thus become uncommon sense. Joe and Charlie. That statement later became step 10, where we continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. The big book. I was to sit quietly when in doubt, asking only for direction and strength to meet my problems as he would have me. Never was I to pray for myself, except as my request bore on my usefulness to others. Then only I might expect to receive. But that would be in great measure. Joe and Charlie, we see all the elements of step 11 where we sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God. The big book. My friend promised that when these things were done, I would enter a new relationship with my creator, and that I would have the elements in a new way of living which answered all of my problems. Joe and Charlie, it's got to be the first part of step 12, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. So we see Bill in the town's hospital applying the Oxford group tenets, which he later made into the last 10 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. This is why he was able to say in how it works. These are the steps we took, which are suggested as a program of recovery. Bill took them in the town's hospital with the help of Ebby. Now let's see what happened to him. In the big book, belief in the power of God, plus enough willingness, honesty, and humility to establish and maintain the new order of things were the essential requirements. Simple, but not easy. A price had to be paid. It meant destruction of self-centeredness. It must turn in all things to the Father of light who presides over us all. Joe and Charlie. Poor old alcoholics have to give up the 2 most important things in our lives. The very first thing is our alcohol, and the second thing is our self-centeredness. Very difficult to do. Very difficult, but very simple. In the big book, there were revolutionary and drastic proposals, but the moment I fully accepted them, the effect was electric. There was a sense of victory, followed by such a peace of serenity I had never known. There was utter confidence. I felt lifted up as though a great clean wind of a mountaintop blew through and through. God comes to the most men gradually, but his impact on me was sudden and profound. For a moment I was alarmed and called my friend, the doctor, to ask if I were still sane. He listened in wonder as I talked. Joe and Charlie, Bill overheard Lewis and Dr. Silkworth talking, so he thought he had gone crazy. He thought he'd check it out with Dr. Silkworth to see if he had gone crazy. Finally, he shared with the doctor his experience. Pass. Oh, Jen, you're muted.
Finally, he shook his head, saying, "Something has happened to you I don't understand, but you had better hang on to it. Anything is better than the way you were." The good doctor now sees many men who have such experiences. He knows that they are real. Joe and Charlie. Now, we don't know what happened to Bill that day. We were not there to see that, but we know this was probably about December the 14th of 1934. We do know that Bill didn't die until January of 1971. We do know that it was never necessary for him to take another drink from this day until the day that he died. Something profound took place in his life that day. Bill always said, "I had a vital spiritual experience as the result of these steps, during which old ideas were cast aside and replaced with a new set of ideas, and I was able to live the rest of my life without drinking." Now, here's a guy that went in the hospital, selfish and self centered to the extreme, always doing what he wanted to do, whenever he wanted to do it. That was his attitude when he went in there. Let's look at his attitude now that he's had a spiritual experience. Big book. While I lay in the hospital, the thought came that there were thousands of hopeless alcoholics who might be glad to have what I had been so freely given me. Perhaps I could help some of them. They, in turn, might work with others. Joe and Charlie. Bill had that gigantic spiritual experience, and then he immediately began to think of how he can give it to other people. Something profound happened with Bill, he said. My friend had emphasized the absolute necessity of demonstrating these principles in all my affairs. Particularly was it imperative to work with others as he had worked with me. Faith without works was dead, he said, and how appallingly true for the alcoholic. For if an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, he would not survive the certain trials and low spots ahead. If he did not work, he would surely drink again, and if he drank, he would surely die. Then faith would be dead indeed. With us, it's just like that. Joe and Charlie. This time you'll notice it's a small f. He's referring to Ebby now. Thank God Bill knew that and accepted the fact, because when he was in Akron about to get drunk, he remembered how back in New York City, even though he'd never helped anybody else, that he himself had felt better. That's why he got hold of Dr. Bob, to try to help Dr. Bob. Not necessarily to sober up Bob, but to keep Bill from getting drunk. Thank God it kept him from getting drunk, and Bob sobered up, and from there we have the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. Faith without works is dead. And you know, just about anybody I see drink today that's been in AA for any period of time, usually they have quit working with other people. When they quit working with other people, one, they start thinking about self only. Two, after a while, all the old problems come back. And three, they end up getting drunk all over again. Always working with others will help us when nothing else will. Amen.
Mhm.
Yes,
All right.
home stretch here.
Yes, the big book. My wife and I had abandoned ourselves with the enthusiasm to the idea of helping other alcoholics to the solution of their problems. It was fortunate for my old business associates remained skeptical for a year and a half, during which I found little work. I was not too well at the time, and I was plagued by waves of self-pity and resentment. This sometimes nearly drove me back to drink, but I soon found that when all other measures failed, work with another alcoholic would save the day. Many times I had gone to my old hospital in despair. On talking to a man there, I would amazingly be lifted up and set on my feet. It is a design for living that works in rough going. Joe and Charlie, we took a design for living that works in rough going and turned it into a non-drinking society, I'm afraid. This is the design for living. The work is really, really hard, but the pay is really, really good too. We've managed to stay sober, isn't that something? Now, if we are a brand new alcoholic out here in California, no fellowship around us, the first contact we have had is this book called Alcoholics Anonymous. And we have read the doctor's opinion and have been able to see our problem is what our problem is. We've read Bill's story and been able to identify with another alcoholic. And we've saw Bill go from drinking for fun to drinking because it's absolutely necessary. And finally, to the sickest of all reasons, drinking to achieve complete oblivion. Saw him, and then we saw him recover from that condition. Surely we can say to ourselves, we are enough like this guy that if he can recover, just maybe we can recover too. The beginning of belief and the beginning of hope. So that wraps up week 3 from last week for Bill's story. We do have a half hour left, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, about 4 pages for week 4, and then it's just homework. I don't think it'll take any time. I don't know if you want to comment on anything from Bill's story, or if you related to anything, or if we should just move on.
Well, I definitely can relate to working with others, helping to keep me sober. Because when I agree to either go to a meeting with somebody or, go through the steps with them, it's fortifying my own program, and getting me to open that big book again is such a gift. And so I really appreciate when people ask me to take them through the steps, because it just familiarizes me more and more with the solution to my chronic and fatal disease, which, luckily is treatable too. And I have a daily reprieve, but I know my disease wants me dead. So I try to be available to people, help people as much as possible. And anybody, in this workshop who's looking to work with a sponsor, the steps, I know that Jessica and I are available and would love to work with you.
I'm excited. I've been actively trying to get to more meetings to try to find a sponsee, but I know that with step 12, try to carry the message of the alcoholics, if that can't happen, I feel like this is just a great way to stay connected in the program and stay kind of working the steps until it's that time. And I really identify with Bill's story, especially at the end here. Like, I've been sober for whatever, almost 14 months now. Before that, I've had periods of sobriety kind of by force, kind of because I knew I needed to be sober, but I didn't do any of these things, so I always did end up drinking. Where it says like we usually quit working with other people, we think about ourselves, and after a while the problems come back and we get drunk all over again. I never did any of these things like working with other people, so it was just kind of like whatever they call it, like white knuckling it, I guess, because I never did any of those things and I drank every time. And when I got to rehab, I didn't even feel good myself, and I was just trying to kind of be like, how could I maybe be nice to somebody? I can always be nice to somebody else, maybe help somebody else if I can't do anything for myself, because and that worked for me until we started working the steps and everything. And I'll find myself too, when it says the old problems come back, most of the time it's because I probably didn't go to very many meetings that week or stay connected with other people and didn't do anything for anybody else. I can really relate with that whole thing.
Hmm.
Um, so I'm just grateful we have this program. I met somebody this week that has pancreatic cancer, and we were sitting and talking at the pool the other day. And he was saying, because I was talking about being sober and, the AA program, and he was like, how nice is it that you guys have a group that you can go to and have like a solution for your problems? Where, I took it for granted, like, oh, they'll keep coming back. They'll always be, like I almost take it for granted sometimes, because he was saying, he has cancer and he wasn't doing well. And to his knowledge of what's local and stuff, there is no groups. There's no support socially for, they have a common problem too, but they don't get the opportunity like we do. So that gave me a lot of gratitude, because it's like, thank God, you know, they came up with this book and this group, because a lot of other people don't even have a solution to their problem.
Yeah. We have friends wherever we go.
Yeah. So I thought that was actually kind of cool. But I guess since we've wrapped up week 3, we'll start on week 4, and I will pull up that page here. Oh, that's a whole new document. Hold on. Close all tabs. Where's my week 4? There we go. So we are on chapter 2. There is a solution. The Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous is a great thing. There is a power in people who are supporting each other in the AA fellowship. It is a very strong support group. It is therapeutic to be amongst others who have recovered from the same problem. But we think that this fellowship alone would never have held us together in the way we are now joined. This is a very important warning in the Big Book. Early on, people in this program didn't have a lot of problems with the fellowship like we have today. The earlier people didn't have much fellowship at all. There were only a few small groups when the Big Book was written, one in New York and a small number in Cleveland and Akron, Ohio, and a few other groups scattered around here and there. So you see, they could not go to 90 meetings in 90 days. They had to work the real program directly out of the Big Book. It actually kind of just relates to what we were just talking about. Today we have a much larger AA fellowship. You could just go around fellowshipping and never work the program suggested in the Big Book. You can just live off the fellowship, but you can't get and stay sober from the fellowship alone, because the vital spiritual experience that comes from action aligned in the first 164 pages of the Big Book. The fellowship alone will not change your life. Some people say go to 90 meetings in 90 days and you'll get sober. Well, you may get dry from alcohol, but you will not recover from the dis-ease. You will not get sober. You cannot become a parent by going to 90 PTA meetings for 90 days. You have to take some steps. And I can really relate to that because, like, honestly, if I could just go to a meeting every day to stay sober, I would. And that would be sweet. But I've gone to meetings every day and I've drank before and I didn't work the steps. So it says not in one page in the Big Book, go to 90 meetings in 90 days. It doesn't even say to go to a meeting every day. People like just make this stuff up. It doesn't say it in the Big Book. Honestly, and I lived in sober living and I saw it a lot there too. And I'm a firm believer in, like, I wouldn't be able to stay sober without the steps because I haven't before. I went out drinking every time, and there's only 2 solutions to that obsession of to keep drinking. It's like you either keep drinking and die or find a solution, which is a higher power. I have no idea how someone can stay sober and not work the steps. But that's personal opinions of mine. But I'll go on to reading here that says, Bill says the fellowship is not enough. He says the tremendous fact for every one of us is that we have discovered a common solution. The common problem is a great bond, but he said the real thing is a common solution. The Big Book carries a great message of the common solution. Later, it revealed that the common solution to alcoholism is a vital spiritual experience. We are determined from the first part of the Big Book that we are powerless. In the part of the book, he writes the prescription. The prescription is power. And Bill tells us that the power of the fellowship and the power of the common solution will overcome any person's powerlessness over alcohol. Anyone can get sober, but the real questions are, how do you stay sober? How do you change? How do you learn to live in a manner that you are able to stay sober in the future? And I will pass. Thank you.
Bill warns us that even though the fellowship is one of the powerful elements in the cement that binds us together, that alone is not enough. The great fact is that we need both elements for recovery. The same 2 things Bill needed to have in order to recover: the fellowship, which Bill and Ebby had, and the practical program of action, which led him to the vital spiritual experience. This is the real solution to the disease of alcoholism. Big Book. There's no way that I can trigger my allergy, produce the phenomenon of craving, end up drunk, sick, and in trouble if I don't take the first drink. That makes good sense to me. Therefore, the main problem of the alcoholic is centered in the mind rather than in the body. The fact that I'm allergic to alcohol is important for me to understand, but the real problem centers in the mind rather than the body. All action is born in thought. There's no way that I can drink unless my mind tells me that it's okay to take a drink.
Hmm.
There is the obsession that somehow, someday, we will beat the game. Here is the word obsession now entering into the picture. The great obsession of every alcoholic is to drink like normal people. This is the great lie that we believe that someday, somehow, we're going to be able to beat the game. We actually believe a lie, and based on the lie, we make a decision to take a drink. We take
Mm-hmm.
a drink, and that triggers the allergy, and then we can't stop. The real problem centers in the mind rather than the body.
Mm-hmm.
Big book. We are without defense against the first drink. If we could only remember what a drink does to us. If only we could remember the jailhouses, the divorce courts, the hospitals, the humiliations, the pain, and the sufferings of the last drunk, we wouldn't take a drink. But we can't remember with sufficient force to keep us from taking the first drink. The mind will give us some excuse to take it. There is a complete failure of the kind of defense that keeps us from putting our hand on a hot stove. Alcohol is like a hot stove. It has burned us over and over again. We are strangely insane when it comes to alcohol. If we've placed ourselves beyond human aid, then the AA fellowship alone will not bring about recovery from the disease of alcoholism, because the fellowship is made up of a bunch of human beings who are just powerless as I am. Recovery will have to come through somehow other than human power. And I'll pass to you.
Okay. I've learned a couple of things by reading this appendix. Oh, let me scroll for these other readers. My concept of a spiritual experience is not at all what I had when I first read this book. This is an entirely different concept. I've learned that it doesn't make a difference whether it is a spiritual experience or a spiritual awakening. Either one can occur. It is one is slow and fast, but the end result will be I've tapped an unsuspected inner resource of strength, which I identify as a power greater than human power, or God as I understand him. This is a key statement that we need because later on we are going to look at this unsuspected inner resource of strength. The one key word in the entire appendix is change. Bill is the kind of writer that repeats himself over and over. A good writer uses many different words to repeat himself. Notice on page 567, he uses the word change in many different ways. In the first paragraphs, he talks about a personality change sufficient to bring upon recovery. In the second paragraph, he said, personality changes in the nature of sudden and spectacular upheavals. An upheaval is a change. In the third paragraph, he talks about revolutionary changes. To revolutionize is to change something entirely. Here he talks about an immediate and overwhelmingly God consciousness. To overwhelm something is to change it. A vast change in feeling and outlook. In the fourth paragraph, the first sentence, he talks about transformations. To transform is to change. In the middle of the paragraph, he talks about profound alterations. To alter is to change. So the key word in this vital spiritual experiences to change our personality. When we got to AA, we were usually restless, irritable, and discontented. We come in filled with shame, fear, guilt, and remorse. This is our personality when we enter AA. If we want to stay sober, we need to find a new way of life. We are going to have a change in our personality and become peaceful, happy, serene, useful, and helpful human beings. The fellowship alone will not bring this change in without the practical program of action that's outlined in the first 164 pages of the big book. It is a combination of both that brings about the vital spiritual experience. We are told in the big book that there are two powers. One is the fellowship, which supports us, and the other is the common solution, which is the practical program of action, which changes us. And will give us the spiritual experience. We need both powers in order to recover. It is doubtful that any of us are going to recover without the fellowship, but we also doubt if any of us will recover without the vital spiritual experience. The two alternatives we have are to go on to the bitter end, blotting out the consciousness of our intolerable situation as best we can, or to accept spiritual help. A good textbook never tells you something without giving you a good example of it. The doctor's opinion was followed by Bill's story, wherein here lies the perfect example of alcoholism. He now has told us the need for the vital spiritual experience. On page 26, we see an example of a fellow who had this vital spiritual experience where he left the idea came from. His name was Roland Hazard. This was the man that went to the judge and got Abby Thatcher released to his custody. Refer to the chart diagram, which is going to be on the next page. What is the solution? So I guess we go here. So where the hell does it start? Old members sharing their experience, strength, and hope to the new member who has to believe, becomes willing, and investigates, which gives them a simple kit of spiritual tools, the 12 steps, which revolutionizes our whole attitude and outlook upon life toward our fellows and toward God's universe. The personality change is sufficient to recover from alcoholism, and then brings it back to the fellowship who suffers from the same problem. And it is a cycle. So there's that. I'm gonna go back to this and finish reading here. So in the big book, it says, Carl Jung, a celebrated psychiatrist, gave Roland the solution of a vital spiritual experience. Roland came back to New York and got involved in the Oxford program. By using their steps in the program of action, he was able to find his power and recover. Now we can see where the steps came from. The first step came from Dr. Silkworth, a non-alcoholic. The second step came from Dr. Carl Jung, another non-alcoholic. Roland Hazard got into the Oxford group, a group of non-alcoholics. The strange thing is how God used all these non-alcoholic people to put this program together. Bill was a key figure that put all these ideas into our program of action, but Bill did not create any of these steps. Bill's mind was used by God as a vessel to put all these ideas together to bring to bring us the program we know today. In the big book, it says, further on, clear-cut instructions are given showing how we recovered. We have previously seen that these words precisely, specifically, and now the words clear cut. Does this not sound like cafeteria style to us? It does sound like you take what you want and leave the rest. It doesn't sound like you take what you want and you leave the rest. They are telling us exactly what they had to do in order to recover from the disease of alcoholism. The things we have learned to this point are the things they had to learn in order to recover, obtaining sobriety. And it says, read page 29 in the big book, paragraph 2 to the end. Do you want me to read that, Jen, or do you want to read it? I don't know if you have a big book in front of you. Oh, you're still muted. It's okay.
You do that in case my dogs start barking.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Each individual in the personal stories describes in his own language and from his own point of view, one, the way he established his relationship with God. These give a fair cross-section of our membership, and two, a clear-cut idea of what has actually happened in their lives. We hope no one will consider these self-revealing accounts in bad taste. Our hope is that many alcoholic men and women desperately in need will see these pages, and we believe that it is only by fully disclosing ourselves and our problems that they will be persuaded to say, yes, I am one of them too. I must have these things.
Thank you, Jen. Well, that wraps up week 4. There is a solution. I don't know if you have any comments on that before we close.
Well, I'll just say that my spiritual experience had happened before I came into AA at all, and it was in the form of HOW, how it works. I was struck, honest, open-minded, and willing, where my whole life up until that point, I had been dishonest, closed-minded, and never willing to try anything unless it was my own idea.
Yeah.
And I just got struck that I wasn't able to control these things. And I was trying so hard to not drink, was trying so hard for my marriage to work. And I just started praying to God. Like I'd never done that really before. was praying to God. And then it took me years to realize that God really answered my prayers by bringing me to AA. And my neighbor actually offered to bring me to a meeting. And I said yes, which is just blows my mind. Why would I say yes? It's because I had had a spiritual experience. And it was a blessing and a gift that I cherish. I'm grateful for. I don't know if I'll ever get it again, so I just hang on to it with everything I have. And I thank you so much for helping me stay involved in the program, because this workshop is awesome. Love it.
Thank you. Well, I'm grateful you helped me get through the steps and identify as an alcoholic and do that step one perfectly, because I was unable to do that before. Which is just like the biggest thing I've taken away. And that last paragraph that you said, we want to be persuaded to say, yes, I'm one of them too. I must have this thing. That's the biggest thing that I'm learning, to be like a message of hope in this program, that there is a solution. Because when I was a newcomer desperately coming in here needing to know what was wrong with me, I needed a message of hope, which was, you helping me work through the steps. And us members of AA need to keep it for how it was created and what it was then, because it's so easy with, decades passing since they made this, to go to a meeting and bitch about problems. Excuse my language, like, we don't have the luxury to do that, because, we're already sober. Like, that's not my group therapy. Like, and I'm not knocking therapy. You know what I mean? Like, I go to therapy. It takes a team of people to keep me sober. Like, and there's places for that, but AA isn't therapy. We have to remember to go in there and be a message of hope in like the sick meetings, or briefly share how we were so that somebody can relate. But even then, I try to take your advice, even when I share now, even if I'm not speaking, to talk about the solution more than the mess. Because, you know, I was one of those people that would go to meetings and hear someone be like, oh, I have 2 DUIs. My wife left me, all this crazy shit. And I'd be like, oh, well, I haven't done that. Maybe I'm not one of you guys.
Mhm.
So it's just something to be mindful of, that we have to talk about the solution in the book, not all, what we've been through, because these people that read this, they need to be persuaded that if they think they have a problem, and, that yes, you may be one of us, and not be somebody that disqualifies, what they're trying to do.
Well said. Yeah.
But thank you for attending. This was great. I love doing this every week.
Yeah.
We
Me too.
matched too.
Isn't that crazy?
Notice that, like, obnoxious pink patterns all over the place. I love it.
Well, you have a great rest of your day. Thanks for your time.
Thanks. See you, Jen.
Yeah.
Bye.